You're listening to the Tales of Leadership podcast. This podcast is for leaders at any phase on their leadership journey to become a more purposeful and accountable leader, what I like to call a pal. Join me on our journey together towards transformational leadership. Welcome back to Tales of Leadership. I am your host, Josh McMillian, an active duty Army officer and the CEO and founder of McMillian Leadership Coaching, and I am on a mission to create better leaders, what I like to call purposeful, accountable leaders. And my vision is to positively affect 1 million lives in the next 10 years. And I plan to do that by sharing transformational stories and skills. On today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan is the CEO of InterimExecs, which matches top executives with companies around the world. Based on research with thousands of leaders and companies, he and Olivia Wagner wrote Right Leader, Right Time. Discover your leadership style for a winning career and company, and has launched the FABS Leadership Assessment, a free assessment at rightleader.com designed to help leaders and organizations perform better. Jordan has also authored How They Did It, billion-dollar insights from the heart of America, and helped publish Start With No from Jim Camp's bestseller on negotiations. Robert understands to have the right leadership team is key to hiring and retaining top talent. And oftentimes the leadership a company needs is not the leadership it has yet. Let's go ahead and bring on Robert. Robert, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Joshua. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So I always say it, but I really am. I'm humbled by the opportunity every time that I get to talk about leadership. So it's one of my passions, and I'm really excited to get your perspective on leadership. Before we get started, if you could take the time to explain who you are to our listeners.
Sure. Bob Jordan, and run a company called InterimExecs, which is a matchmaker around the world between organizations and leaders. And that's how it came around to writing a book called Right Leader, Right Time. And looking forward to our conversation about that. And I'm your classic entrepreneur, though. I've been involved in a whole bunch of businesses. Some of them failed and some of them did great. And luckily there were those good ones in there.
That's where the real magic is, Robert, I believe, is where a lot of people, I feel that they always want to jump straight to your book, but I want to learn the magic that inspired you, the passion, the purpose that got you to that point of kind of where you're at right now. And before we even get started, because you have a really rich experience level, especially being an entrepreneur or being a CEO, being an author. And I'm so jaded by my definition of leadership through the military of where I'm at. But how would you define leadership in your terms?
Well, we had to have a kind of strict definition at the lowest level in a way, based on coming out with an assessment of leadership as well as the book. And so if you are in an organization and you have responsibility for another person, you're a leader.
I love it.
You know, I like other definitions that include influence and decision-making, and those are all absolutely valid. But we had to have, kind of a technical measure just to say, listen, if you got responsibility for another human being, you are in the leader's seat. Now I want to hear your definition, Joshua.
Oh, you put me on the spot. I love it. So I struggled with this when I was trying to learn what my definition of leadership was. One of my mentors that I've read a lot of his books, John Maxwell, he defines leadership as influence, that one word, kind of nothing more, nothing less. But to me, influence, and I've always thought of this word first pops in my mind, is that's kind of a manipulation. And as a leader, we never truly want to manipulate. We want to inspire people to do things. And that word just stuck with me when I heard inspire. And I looked at the Army's definition of leadership, and not because I'm still active duty Army, but I'm going to go with this as my definition. And I pulled it up, ADRP, influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and a motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. But if I had to sum it up in one word, I would sum it up as inspire.
Yeah. Well, one of the Army's most famous and wonderful leaders, Eisenhower,
Mm,
he had this example. He would say this string, try pushing it. You can't do it. You can pull, you can have this influence essentially, which is to inspire, but you can't push it.
yeah, I gotta look that quote up. I read that quote not too long ago in a book, and now I've totally lost it. But what I really want to start with is where your leadership journey began. Where do you think your leadership journey began?
Well, for a long time, I've been drawn to wanting to start things.
Mm,
So even when I was a little kid, I remember early on this experience. I was with a bunch of buddies, and we were little. We're talking 5, 6, 7 years old, and I wanted to make a go kart. And so I had all these buddies. I looked around at one point, had a lot of wood. Some guys are hammering, and some guys are sawing. And I told them all of what to do. They just thought I didn't know the word delegate at that point.
I love it.
But, I was the kid, who in the summer was going around, can I cut your lawn? And in the winter, can I shovel your driveway? And that's a bygone thing because, like, I have daughters, and when we were in the suburbs, not once while they were growing up did any kid from the neighborhood ever come around and say, you know, cut your lawn, shovel. That generationally didn't exist anymore. Further proof points for me. I was in business school. I was at Northwestern, which at the time was arguably the number one business school in the world, and I was antsy to leave. I loved it in a way, but just sitting there in class, oh my God, couldn't do it. And I thought up an idea, which became the first magazine anywhere in the world that covered online and internet. And, sounds like a great idea. I was only 5 years ahead of time, 5 years before the World Wide Web. There were commercial online services. But anyway, so I dropped out to start a publishing company, made every mistake you could make, did that for a number of years and sold it to a big publisher. And then by chance, a miraculous chance, met a guy who had a weird job title. He was an interim CEO, arguably the first interim CEO in the United States. And the internet bubble was heating up, and he handed me his card, and his card said CEO of Yahoo.
Oh, wow.
And that made a very deep impression because at the time, there were companies in Silicon Valley who had figured out how to shorten the process of going public. Before that, it had taken 6 months generally, and they figured out how to do it within about 30 days apiece. And so this guy, the first CEO of Yahoo, I said, you're now my mentor. And came home from him telling me what he did, and I bought 2 domain names, interimceo.com and interimcfo.com. Essentially hung out a shingle and started doing gigs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I did that for a while. And then when social networks came around, Facebook, MySpace, LinkedIn, I thought, I wonder how many people in the world do these kind of projects like my mentor and I, and I'd been approached by other people. And that's what led us to form this organization, InterimExecs, which is now this worldwide kind of capability.
So there's 2 beautiful things in there that I want to pull out and I really want to get into some of your failures, what continued to push you. So, because I think you're an artist, right? Like as a leadership
To my
style.
peril. Yes. Yeah, to my peril. I'm an artist leader. Yeah.
But that is one of, I think, the most enduring qualities in a leader. Because oftentimes when we run into an obstacle, we want to quit, but it takes that rare individual, especially when they're doing it by themselves, to continue to pursue, to continue to be gritty and be in that hunt. And I think people who do that have a very good understanding of what they're passionate about, and they can align that to the purpose of why they're put on this earth. And I always talk about kind of head and heart alignment. But you talked about 2 things, and the first one is I wanted to pull out is that you found a mentor early. And that's a really key takeaway, is you found a mentor and you allowed them to guide you. What drew you to asking for a mentor? Did you just know that, hey, this individual was right for me to kind of help shorten the learning curve?
Boy, it's a great question, Joshua. My it's so funny. My experience with a number of mentors is that it's like the Zen expression, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I wasn't seeking it out. I mean, I had this magazine, Online Access, and I sold it, and I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my career. And it was, it's Einstein's line. Einstein said, you either believe everything is miraculous, everything is a miracle, or nothing is. And so I've just been blessed. I mean, I wasn't seeking it out, but here, I acquired a mentor exactly when I needed him. And I joke with a lot of people, which is, I'm a person, I have determined the entire course of my career. And it was really based on one conversation with a guy I didn't know that well, but he kind of blew my head open, telling me what he did. And I've had a series of mentors who were similar, that it wasn't like I set out one day and said, I really need a mentor on this, that it was more a series of epiphanies, if you will.
Yeah. It's so that's one of the beauties about being in the military and moving often. So I'm at Redstone Arsenal right now in Huntsville, Alabama, but I'm getting ready to move to Fort Belvoir next. So about every 2 years for the last 16 years, we've been moved, uprooted everywhere. But I am surrounded by truly great leaders, both male and female. And I have the opportunity to see greatness every day, but through multi facets of leadership styles. And I can take those as kind of a building block. And there's always those leaders that I've ran into, and I don't know what it is, right? But they just perfectly align to your core values. And maybe that's what it is. It's a commonality between the core values that we share, that, hey, I want you to be a part of my life. I want you to help guide me, because who you are right now is who I want to become. And the way I always look at it is, where you are right now, 10 years ahead of me, when I get to that level as a leader, I want to be like you. So what made you become that individual?
Well, it's interesting because, I know we're going to talk about leadership style. You are within an organization that kind of quintessentially defines the training of one of the 4 styles that we call strategist.
Strategy, yeah.
Because strategist, or you could give it other names in terms of pilot, quarterback, conductor, folks who gravitate towards vast or complex or large organizations, the language there tends to be around gratitude, loyalty, being mentored, mentoring in turn, cross-functionality, longevity, all of these things. And that's quintessentially, those are traits of, all the military services in the US, because they're upholding the highest standards in the world.
And they're often very complex. Every organization.
Yeah. By the way, just a little aside from InterimExecs experience, there are now lots of executives where their careers are project-based, whether you want to call it project, interim, fractional. One of the correlations which we see very strongly is that success in any military service trends far higher than pretty much anything else in determining success in a interim leadership role.
Oh, wow. How many applicants did you interview for that? That's interesting.
Well, over the course of the past dozen plus years, 7,000 executives from 50 countries showed up on our doorstep. And that's what led to the book, because we had to develop systems and ranking and scoring and screening. And these patterns emerged. There was one pattern which was not good, which was the majority of executives showing up were having careers and leadership journeys they might have thought were good. We would call them okay, but not great. And if you were to sum up, why is that, or why were you judging that way? We would say they were trying to be all things to all people. There was too much of that. The flip side was when we identified the top 1, 2, 3%, these are exceptional leaders having remarkable careers. And there we saw these 4 distinct leadership styles. We call it style. We were looking at whether someone had a process, an approach, a system that would help or cause them to be more successful. So we saw these 2 diverging patterns, and that was why we decided, let's go spend 6 years writing a book.
And that was going to be one of my questions that I have so many questions, but what drove you to become an author and then really focus on this topic? Because the book that you wrote, and you just summed it up, but I want to make sure people understood that it took you, what, 6 years?
Yes.
To gather this book, and you interviewed over 7,000 people. That takes a level of commitment that I argue most people nowadays just don't have. So what drove you to do that?
Well, if I can back up a bit,
Yeah.
in the blessings I've had with mentors, another one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Camp. He had been a Air Force fighter pilot, flew for the Flying Tigers, which was merged in with FedEx at some point. But he had flown in Vietnam, and then he had become a negotiations coach. And I met him when he was a negotiations coach, and he was a remarkable person. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he became my coach. And he had a workbook for his clients to teach business people how to negotiate better. And I saw the workbook and I thought, this is incredible. It was contrarian kind of advice. So my first hook for doing a book was Jim, that we would joke about it because it took me 2 years to convince him that we should partner to write a book authored by him based on all of his negotiation system.
Oh, wow.
And we joked about it because the book came out, it became a bestseller. The first book was called Start With No, but that was the joke because Jim said no to me for 2 years. And that book, big publisher, Random House, and it's been a bestseller. It was translated into 20 languages.
Wow.
But Jim was a dear friend, coach, business partner, and only many years after it was published, Random House, we went back and recorded the the audio version of the book about 2 years ago. So that was my first book hook, if you will, which was, it was just a remarkable thing to be able to work with him and to go do that. And that's impacted many thousands of people around the world, and it continues to sell. And that was a gift to the world. Jim put out a gift.
That's amazing.
That was my first kind of, oh, gee, there's something fun doing this, even though it takes a long time.
That was kind of your spark. I think
Yeah.
you're able to work with someone that you cared deeply for, probably personally and professionally. And then that you saw the gift that you could kind of bring into the world with writing a book. Okay.
Well, it started with that he'd saved me. I had this company, and it was disastrous in the beginning, but then in the end, because we're the first magazine covering the internet, well, then I could do no wrong. Once the World Wide Web came around, the business grew so fast, it put me onto the Inc. 500 list for fastest growing businesses. So I go to the Inc. conference and I see one of these seminars, and it's just one word. It says negotiation. And I think, oh, I know how to do that. And I walk in and there was Jim. And at the time, I was just having the tar beat out of me by venture capitalists on a different business. I mean, I was just getting hammered. And so I thought, well, there's no downside here to asking this guy who's got these weird ideas on negotiation, some advice. But that was the start of it. It was completely driven by need. Fast forward, Jim and I did that book, And then I had a blessed event, which is I was in an IPO. I was an early shareholder in a company, went from 0 to 150 million revenue through no work on my part, but I was a little shareholder, and it went public, and that was great. And I started thinking, gee, how do I give back? And that led to another kind of idea, because I'm from Chicago, and at at the time, everybody thought, oh, the only place you can really do technology innovation is Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And that really bothered me. And so here I'd had this blessed event being in an IPO. And so ended up writing a book consisting of, it was 45 Q&A interviews with champion company founders, like the founder of Morningstar and the CEO of Twitter at the time. But that book was, it's called How They Did It, was a direct result of having had a good event and starting to think there's got to be a way to give back.
I I love that. And there's two other things right there that I think is really important is number one, you're unreasonable. So you saw an issue bringing that tech into Chicago because, for example, Silicon Valley was the only place to be it. And I think one of the great characteristics that I've seen between, and I really boil it down, I call it TNT. You're either a transformational leader with a servant heart or you're a toxic leader with transitional practices. And I kind of boil it down to there. And one of the key characteristics of being a servant leader.
Joshua, can I quote you? I need to quote
Yeah,
you on
no,
that.
100%. I would be honored. But that is one of the key characteristics of a hallmark of a great leader is being unreasonable. You see an issue, you see a problem, and that you plant your guide on, and you are unwavering in your resolve. And and I think it goes back to one of the major points that you just said before too, is that having a mentor and having a power of a mentor when you can get someone, and John Maxwell kind of sums this up and it's so beautiful because I see it resonating with so many different leaders that I have the honor to talk to like you, is that we rise to the level of those that we are around. And when you met that individual, you rose to the level that he was at. And that's so important. When we look for mentors in life, we have to find people that are above us. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's because we want to rise to where they are. And then when you get to that level, then you rise together. And that was such a beautiful thing. And I really wanted to narrow it down. But all right, so let's start talking about your book, because I'll keep going on these sidetracks for leadership. So, Right Leader, Right Time. You're a co-author with, is it Olivia Wagner?
Yes.
Okay. So walk me through kind of the genesis of this book.
Sure. So all these thousands of people showing up on our doorstep, if it was a line outside your door, Joshua, that's about 4 miles long. It's a lot.
That's crazy.
And they weren't all they were not all one-on-one interviews, but we saw this pattern and we gave it labels. And as soon as, well, I'm not sure what the expression is, but when you can articulate something, when you can call it something, you make it real. Landmark, the education program, they say language creates reality. And so we started thinking of these labels for what we were seeing. And we have a ringside seat, because when an organization wants to work with us and we're putting an executive or a team with them, we're there the whole way along. And so we're asking the board or the owners, how's it going? How's everybody doing? Are you all happy? And the executives, invariably, because they're all rock stars, they're just crushing it. They're always doing great work. And we're asking, how? I mean, you keep doing this time after time, even in incredibly distressed company circumstances. How do you do that, right? And so we saw these four styles that we gave labels to: fixer, artist, builder, and strategist. And from thinking of that, it was like, oh my gosh, we have to write about this. This has to get out there. And also that at some point it needs to be tested. We need to be held to account here. Are we right or wrong? And so, putting out a book is one thing. It's its own marathon But the other marathon is we've launched an assessment. It's a free 3-minute assessment called FABS Leadership Assessment, FABS for Fixer, Artist, Builder, Strategist. And that over time is going to be the real test, which is the characteristics around each of these styles. Are we right or are we wrong? Where do we need to change?
I love how you wrote a book. It took you 6 years to do it, but you're not done because you're still collecting data to prove your hypothesis, right? And that is, and it's a free resource, which is incredible. So one of the things that I've always used especially when I was a commander, I would have my soldiers take the Strength Finder assessment because I was a big believer. If you knew who you were and you knew others around you and the strengths that they possessed, then you could understand how to communicate to them more clearly and then how to achieve the mission more successfully. How can individuals find your assessment?
FABS Leadership Assessment is at rightleader.com. So if they go to the website, rightleader.com, they'll see assessment. They can click on it, take it. And when they get done, it gives a instant result in terms of saying, congratulations, you're wired as a fixer, and it appears you have a secondary style, whatever it is. And they can also then download a PDF that has descriptions of all of this. And we're hoping people are going to be kind with us in the sense that when we give the result, there's a final question that says, did we get it right? Yes, no. And so that's furthering the research. And what I mean specifically here, Joshua, and I know we're going to get into each of these styles, but we say, for example, fixer is the energy of, folks who love to run into a burning building. They love turnaround. And we think that's a linear style, meaning that people who are primarily wired as fixer, they do not take on multiple projects or companies at a time. To contrast with artist needs parallel, needs multiple at the same time. This intuitively makes sense to us. We've observed it with everyone. Now we're going to see it at a large scale in terms of research over thousands of people and organizations and leaders taking it, if that is in fact true.
I was laughing to myself because I was remembering after every one of my company commands, about 6 months into it, we have to do a command assessment or a command climate survey. So a snapshot of how we're doing as leaders. And in those questions, they're short answer questions. And I'm not even going to tell you some of the most unsavory comments that I have seen in those, but I was just giggling to myself because I remember reading through there and some of the negative responses I was getting. I was like, I bet you Robert isn't going to get nearly as bad as a response that sometimes that I've gotten in my command. And it kind of goes back to one of the original concepts that you talked about, is that we can't be all things to all people. And as a leader, it doesn't matter what you do. Someone on your team is going to love you. Someone on your team is going to feel indifferent, and then someone's going to hate you. And that's just the nature of the job.
Well, you're 100% right. And this is what you've taken on when you want to be a leader. There are days where you're just firing on all cylinders and you just got everything right. And the next day you're a dog. And I don't mean a beloved puppy. I mean, you just can't get it right. And so it is a never-ending challenge. And we were blessed with being able to interview for the book all kinds of incredibly accomplished people. But you would keep on hearing, about their journeys, and it's full of pitfalls.
So kind of walk me through, I do a deep dive on each one of these 4 types.
Fixer is the energy that, as I said, this is a person who loves to run into the burning building time after time. So you think, in your own career, your own journey, we all solve problems. We're not trying to pigeonhole anyone to say, hey, you're just this and you're nothing else. That's not the case. Anyone in a leadership role, you are bringing every capability you have to bear to be effective. And so we all solve problems. The question is this where you get your energy? So for example, I've been in a business a lot of years, owning companies, investing, all of that. I have to solve problems all the time, but I don't get my energy there. Fixer does. And the way it tends to be in a career for a fixer, you could see if you think this resonates for you. Early on, you're smart, you're eager, you're working hard, and somebody on the team says, they say, Joshua's doing great, but over at this other division, over with these other clients, over in this other country, we got a problem and nobody else could solve it. So let's go put Joshua in there and see what happens. And you go in there, and it takes 6 months, it takes a year, 2 years, but you crush it. Like you just solve something nobody else could solve. And now you're hooked. Now you're hooked. Because if you're wired as fixer, it means you can't go back to the steady state, the kind of maintain status quo role, division, organization. You need to go into the next broken thing to go fix it. That's dominant fixer wiring.
I find myself torn between the strategist and the fixer. And I say that because I see qualities of both in myself. And in the military, and this is always kind of held true, is I've been the leader that people call upon to solve complex problems and issues. And where I've been in leadership roles, I'm only usually ever in a position for a year. So I'm thrusted into a leadership challenge. I have a year to quickly solve it. I get it to a steady state, and then I move to another organization. And that was just kind of the climate of where I am as a junior leader, but that has always followed me. And it doesn't matter if there's a live fire when I was going through training, when I was going through Ranger school, getting like stuck on some of the more challenging patrols, going to the company commander, being the deployable commander, it didn't matter. I was always kind of put into those positions. So here's a question. I don't even know if this is possible. Based on the 4 leadership types that you identified, can you have dominant traits in more than one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The way we started looking at it, because the more and more we were thinking about it, is DNA. DNA is just made up of 4 proteins. They're called nucleotides. But whether it's you, me, your Aunt Mary, your favorite dog, the oak tree out your window, just 4 different kinds of proteins in DNA make up all of biological life. But it's to infinite variation. And that's the way we started looking at leadership style with these, which is you have your own unique imprint on how you do it. And what we think is that over the course of career, slowly, maybe at some points it's almost imperceptible, that you're carving this path for yourself that becomes more and more unique. And one of the expressions we love, if there's one takeaway, Joshua, from this for your listeners, it is that exceptional leaders reject what is not for their highest and best use. It's really easy to say that, and it's incredibly hard to do. When you're young, you need the job, you need the money. You can't reject things. That's impossible, or it feels that way. But if you look at your own career, and hindsight's 2020, you need years for this to develop and to see this. As you become more and more successful, there's a pattern. And you make these decisions, and the Latin, the word decision, that in Latin is to kill off. Your decision to kill this, to go in a particular way and not in every other way, is the necessary thing that everybody has to do in career to be successful. And so eventually it starts adding up, and you can see it for yourself, which is, oh, this is how I'm wired.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And that is really, 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 really hard, especially for leaders who are just starting out. And I did not think or even have the ability that I could reject things when I was just starting out as a leader. And now I'm at that point in my career now where I comfortably understand who I am, what my house of leadership is, how I want to lead, what my core values are, what my passion, what my purpose is, that I choose job assignments that I know are going to align with my unique traits and states that I have as a leader. And I literally, I'm not even joking with you, I've created a repeatable and scalable leadership model based on reflecting on all these different leadership challenges and styles that I had. So, okay. So you got the fixer.
So just think about how remarkable what you're saying
Yeah.
is, because you're in a command structure, you're in the Army. So for people that think they don't really have control over their lives or their careers, think about that, because you're there and you are determining your future, and people around you want you to be successful. And so you absolutely are charting this path, which is unique and differentiated. And that is the thing that's available to all of us. Now, it is true, we're talking about leaders here. So we're talking about people who are asserting influence over their lives. You're making that choice. And that's going to involve pain. Well, let's be real clear here that this is going to involve sacrifice to make the decision for A over B.
What was that? I can't remember the word you used, Latin word to kill off. What was that?
Well, it's just a decision, because that side, like homicide, that part of the Latin is those are all related words.
Team, I want to take a quick break from this episode and personally invite you to join our tribe. Are you looking for a community of leaders? If you are a leader at any level, join our Purposeful Accountable Leaders private Facebook or LinkedIn group. We would love to have you in the team. My mission is to create a community that allows leaders to ask questions, celebrate wins, and share lessons learned. All I ask is that you follow the B rule. Be respectful, be humble, be present, and add value to the community. You can find the link in the show notes to either join the Facebook or LinkedIn group, or simply just search Purposeful Accountable Leaders. Back to the podcast. What kind of reminds me of the metaphor of going through the fire, right? So fire is a purification. And as leaders, we always get tested by fire. And throughout life, we get tested by fire. And when we go through that, it literally purifies us. It kills off what was dead, and then it brings up a new, like almost like a phoenix. So I love that word. And when you said that, to kill off, it just reminded me of all the hardships and struggles that I've had to go through, and the toil, the blood, sweat, and tears that I've had to give into things, but who I emerged as was so powerful. So I love that.
Yeah, look, this is, if you ever read any Joseph Campbell, this is the hero's journey. As soon as you say, I will lead in some way, you are making a hero's journey. And the other thing comes to mind, I think it was Ernest Hemingway. He wrote, I think in one of his books, life breaks everyone. If you are lucky, you become stronger at the broken places.
Yes, man. That's so. All right, we have the fixer. What's the next one?
Yes, artist. Artist is the energy, the leadership style that sees the world as a blank canvas or a piece of clay to be molded. So, you want an example of a standout leader in the world today, Elon Musk, and I'm specifically talking about Tesla, SpaceX, and the Boring Company. Just revolutionary kinds of thinking. I mean, if you think before Tesla, the idea of an electric vehicle, at some point in the future, kind of it's the Jetsons, good luck. Tesla is over 20 years old as a company, and there's no car company in the world that is not saying, EV is the future, and governments are going to be banning, combustion engine cars. You can thank Elon for that. He's also a cautionary example. Joshua, as you and I are recording this, he still owns Twitter.
Yeah.
And going into Twitter, I got to tell you, if you're wired as a fixer, that is not your playbook. We all exist within organizations and structures. Even if you're on your own, you're going to answer to investors inside of any organization, or stakeholders, even if it's a nonprofit organization. And the first thing you will hear from any fixer energy person wired as a leader, you say, how are you successful? What do you do? Like, what's day one when you're in this crisis organization? They'll say, you listen.
Mm,
And specifically, you're not, that listening tends to be get down on the shop floor.
yeah.
The people who run the equipment, get in there with the administrative assistants who've been there for years and they're totally discounted. Because in any failing organization, the board of directors, the management team, they're not listening to anybody
Yeah.
low level. They think they know it all, and they blew it. And so fixer energy, that's the way that it tends to be wired. Anyway, so not to pick on Elon, because when he is in artist leadership mode, he is incredible and unstoppable. You think of like Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs, leaders.
Elon Musk, and I kick myself because I remember when he started Tesla, I was like, that's an interesting company. I see a future in that. I should probably invest. And like 20 years later, dang, Josh, should have invested. But
Shoulda, coulda.
shoulda, coulda, woulda. But his vision of what he has, and I was thinking about this of what is his legacy that he's trying to build, and it's a interplanetary humanity, right? So he wants to colonize Mars. He wants to go to Mars. And if you really look at it, what do each one of his companies he has do? Tesla, which finds renewable, sustainable energy that does not run off fossil fuels, which is needed to colonize a planet. And then you have SpaceX, which you have to get resources to that planet, people, things, and material. And then the Boring Company. Well, it's probably going to have a very large underground complex if we ever do colonize Mars, and how all three of those are interchanged into this big vision that he has of trying to get to Mars. And it dawned on me one day, man, this dude is a mad scientist. He's a comic book like super villain. If he chose to be, he could literally be like the next Iron Man. It's such an interesting, and I fully agree with you. That is, I think, the beautiful example of an artist, and I am not one. That's for sure.
Well, look, I'm wired as artist, but we write in the book, it's to your peril.
Yeah.
Because that energy is renegade, rebellious, not always liked, not the most popular person on the team, but capable of discontinuous kind of leaps that especially if you're within an organization that is stagnant, that is absolute proof you are lacking artist energy in a leadership role. And we can get to this in terms of collaboration, but a number of strategist leaders would say to us that would be the key kind of collaboration for them, is that while a lot of strategist leaders and large organizations in those roles can relate to fixer and to builder, they absolutely see collaboration with the crazies out there, the artist leaders, as necessary.
And I think the reason why, because I find myself as a strategist, at my core, is because they help us find the dead space. So in a military operation, whenever we're planning a mission, there's always part of the terrain that is either heavily vegetated or something that we can't control based off the topography with our direct or indirect fires. Well, I think of that metaphor in real life is that there are things that are just going to be naturally blind to me because of the way that I think. And if I surround myself with someone else that sees the world differently than me, then they're going to open up my field of view. And that dead space that was invisible to me will become visible, and I will be a better leader and the organization will be better for it. And there was another example that I love about Elon Musk is when he sold PayPal, burnt the bridge, all the money he made from that to start Tesla. And that takes guts. I don't know if I could do that. So I love it. We need more Elon Musk in the world to make society better. I believe we need people that type of energy.
Yeah. But for each of us, it's the hero's journey, and there is that leap that we can each take. And it's not going to be the same as saying, okay, we're going to get humanity to Mars. It's okay. you know.
So we have the fixer, we have the artist. What would be the next one?
Builder. Now, look, I know everyone in organizations like, I'm a builder. Yes, got it. We mean something specific, which is builder is an energy that can take small, nascent, beginning product, service, team, client relationships to a point of market domination. There are mantras for each of these four styles, and the mantra of builder is market dominance. A mantra for artist is creation. It's all about the act of creation. For fixer, it's velocity. You're coming into something that is dying, and you're under pressure. If you were in an ER, and the patient comes in and they're blue, airways, breathing, and so for builder, there is this energy around the people, the process, the product. So all builders talk about: people, process, product. That you want to get it from the small state to dominance, to scale. It can be world domination. Most builders, it's not.
Like Pinky and the Brain.
What's that?
Like Pinky and the Brain, one of the old
Yes.
cartoons that I used to watch as a child every Sunday, trying to get world domination.
So, but for a lot of builders, it is like, for example, if in your town there's a real estate developer, maybe it's residential, commercial, whatever, but everyone knows them, that is, well, they're literally builders, but they're also builder in the leader sense because they want to dominate that town. I spent a lot of time in Boston, and there's a bakery chain in Boston that is phenomenal. And it's not only that the product is great, but their presence in Boston and the suburbs, better than anyone else there. I've never seen that chain in any other American city. At the heart of that bakery, there's a builder. And that builder said, I own Boston.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be the best in Boston. That's builder energy. What you tend to see with builders is that when something reaches scale, they may get bored. They tend to rotate off. They tend to want to do it all over again. If you know somebody where like they got an IPO and then they leave and they go to a related or unrelated field, that's builder energy.
It's funny when you said that they want to dominate their field. And the first thing I thought of, it popped in my mind, is this real estate agent in Huntsville. If you ever drive here, you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about. His name is Matt Curtis. That dude has a sign and a billboard and commercials and radio advertisements everywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, this dude has had to spend tens of millions of dollars, but he has controlled this area, and he basically sells a home, I think, every 8 hours, something like that. And he has this huge billboard. As soon as you pull into Huntsville, the number of homes that he has sold. And yep, that's spot on. So he is a builder.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And last but not least is strategist. Strategist is the leader at scale. Strategist is the leader within either a very complex organization or something vast in size. And to contrast with fixer, artist, and builder, these leaders, they could be in charge of 5 people, 10, 50, maybe 100, maybe 150. But generally speaking, the team size is within what Stephen Covey called personal span of control, meaning that everybody knows everybody, and that leader can rely on personal relationships and trust to get done what needs to get done. Strategist does not have that luxury. There are core around them, but more than that, there are so many people that they cannot all know each other personally or rely on that as their way to succeed. And by succeed, I mean to take this complex or vast organization and excel over all competitors. Very hard. So as we talked about before, the language of strategist, very different from the other 3 styles. It's about loyalty. It is about cross-training. It's about mentoring and being mentored. It's about gratitude. And you just don't hear those kind of motivators as much out of fixer, artist, and builder.
Yeah, that's a strategic level of leadership in the military. There's a magic number, and I think it's 150. So if you ever read the book, kind of Hewitt Packer, and if you ever look of how rifle companies are organized, there's a reason that at the tactical level of maneuver forces, they're structured around this magic number of 150, because at 150, you can build intimate relationships with everyone still on your team. But beyond that number, it begins to evade you. And then you have to rely on others, exactly what you just said. So I can totally see that. And I also would argue potentially that strategists aren't born, like how you said that they're raised in a way. And maybe you could go from a fixer, and I guess this is a question, could you go to be a fixer and eventually adapt to be a strategist just by design?
Absolutely. Strategist is you could call it almost a trained style. You don't, and this is not to say that, you as a leader are not thinking strategically. We don't mean it just in the descriptive sense of the word. You train into this over many years. An example of a great strategist who just retired, Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx. Clearly, he kind of rounded the bases, which most leaders don't do, and they don't need to do. When you write a paper in college with a crazy idea, gee, let's go deliver packages overnight by airplane and take on the U.S. Postal Service. That's the act of an artist. Everybody's heard stories probably about FedEx, how he couldn't meet payroll early on, so he goes to Las Vegas to gamble to win the payroll. And if that's not a fixer kind of energy, velocity, what is? And of course, building, to the point of hundreds of thousands of employees, across 150, 200 countries. But ultimately, where he resided best was strategist. That he stayed, in a leadership role of incredibly vast and complex organization. One of the leaders we interviewed for the book, strategist, is the former Undersecretary of the Department of Defense, Dr. Janine Davidson, and her responsibility was the Navy. And to talk to her about what leadership means at that level of complexity and size was, she described systems of systems.
Yes.
And that your ability to influence is something that in the moment could appear imperceptible, but that over time could have huge impact, if you're doing it right. One of the other strategists we interviewed ran a big insurance company, and he had 15,000 people working for him. And he described this challenge of moving what he called the vast middle. And what he meant was, if you're in a large organization, the low end of it, the very low end, something's going to happen. Namely, they're not all going to stay there because they're not performing well. And at the high end, he said, you don't motivate those people. Their batteries are included. They're going so fast that's not it. But there's this vast middle where the motivations for them are not the same as at the high or the low end. And now you have the challenge of being a strategist and figuring out, how do you take that force and excel beyond your competitors?
When I was in command, and you're so true, and I broke it down to the 20-60-20 rule. So the 20% of the bottom, it doesn't matter what you do, you're never going to change their mind. They're probably going to be getting out, but there's a vast middle ground that there's greatness there. We just have to cultivate it. And I think the mindset, a lot of people that are in that, is that they're buried. And I would always try to get their mindset to shift. You're not buried, you're planted. There's going to be a time that you're going to shine. And maybe your moment's not here, but it'll come. Just continue to keep your nose to the grindstone. And then there's that 20% at the top. They know they're rock stars. You don't have to do anything. They're just going to do it.
And the part of this, sorry for interrupting you, but part of this with large organization is, you're in a leadership role, but do not assume that everyone is motivated like you're motivated. Because that vast middle of the organization can have incredibly different reasons for what drives them. And by the way, this is part of, we just went through the great resignation during COVID. And there's still so much remote work and just unsettled
Mm.
versus what existed before the pandemic. And so you're seeing now motivations among a lot of people in the workforce that are not what traditionally would drive people. Traditional drive would be lifetime employment and 9 to 5, and I go into the office or the factory every day, and my income is the most important thing to me. That's no longer the case for many people. They will talk about freedom and flexibility as equally or more important than the income.
Yeah, I get breaking it down because those are some of the pillars of life that I've kind of gauged myself. So I'm a weirdo, right? I have a whiteboard. You can't see it, but so my freedom goals, they're all umbrellaed under freedom, and I call them my 7 Fs. So fun, fulfillment, filled, finances, fitness, faith, and family. All of those are equally important to me, and I create kind of goals on that. But that is so true, and also frustrating because I'm going to be honest with you, Robert. I despise teleworking. I love being in the room with people and having conversations because that's where I think true magic happens because people can hide behind their digital screen and just get by, and it just frustrates me. So after reading this book, taking the assessment, how can leaders apply these lessons learned to become a better leader?
It's a great question. And the first thing to do is have a conversation within your organization. Because if you come to embrace more of who you are, then, and hopefully that's validating for you, that the way you're wired is absolutely perfect and great for you. That if you can embrace that to have a conversation with somebody else on your team or within your organization is the first step for everybody performing better. Because presumably within your team, you want to see me do well so the team does well. And I want to see you do well because the better you do, the team does well, so we all do better. And that comes from more authenticity and from genuineness between us. And so the more I know, Joshua, that, I know you're wired with all that fixer energy. And so frankly, I should be giving you the worst problem I can't solve. If pride says I have to keep it all to myself, well, again, now we're in mediocre leadership mode, which is trying to be all things to all people. And what's wrapped up in all of that is lack of confidence. Because the more that you're trusting to what you're great at, and that's when I should have the ball, and that what you're great at, you should have the ball. That's confidence. It's confidence in myself. It's confidence in you. And that's what leads to superior collaboration. All leaders, everybody says, oh, I'm great collaborating. Well, no, everyone is not. The less secure you are, the less confident you are that you absolutely are in the right place. Very hard to truly collaborate and trust other people. So the first thing we would say is have a conversation, because the more we can discover about each other, oh my gosh, we can just perform better together as an organization.
That's great. And it's so simple too. Like I'm an infantryman by heart. So I always joke that I'm 1 degree away from eating crayons like my Marine brothers, right? But I follow a rule called KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And I love how this book breaks leadership down into 4 styles. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't got an opportunity to read it yet, but I'm going to. It's on my list of this year to read. And then how easily you can apply this to your family life. I think you could do it. And then in your personal life, it bridges the both the personal and the professional. I have so many questions I did not get to, but out of respect to time, I always try to keep it around the hour. I have a couple more for you, but the one that I really want to know, after you've went through this journey, how has your individual leadership philosophy changed after getting to talk to so many great leaders?
Well, I want to keep more and more embracing my own particular style, and I'm going to tell you that's not easy because
Yeah.
I'm part of a partnership that runs a business, and problems come up, you know, and so you can be distracted. We live in an age of distraction. You
Oh,
can be
yes.
distracted. You can be drawn off of your strength every day, and so I make a concerted effort to try to honor what it is I can bring to the team, and in turn to be very aware of everyone around me so that they can shine. And that's not something where you get to just take, you can't take that for granted or rest on your laurels. And I want to apply that every day to the people that I meet as well. See them at their best, because listen, the nature of the way work occurs now is so much of what happens is not based on people being in full-time roles. Most companies rely on outsourcing for all kinds of things. So many of us are on teams where it's not just you and your coworker, next to you. It's all kinds of resources and people, typically around the US, around the world, and you're relying on them. And they're relying on you. And you're not technically employed by the same company, but boy, you're on the same team.
That's powerful. That's great advice. I think this whole hour podcast has been just absolutely great advice. And I love having perspectives outside the military because it's needed. It's time for our final show segment that I like to call the Killer Bees. These are the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on the Tales of Leadership podcast. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. Question 1. So what do you believe separates a good leader from an extraordinary leader?
Extraordinary leaders reject what is not for their highest and best use.
Love it. What is one resource that you can recommend to our listeners to be a better leader today?
Well, my bias is everyone in terms of being a better negotiator. Jim Camp's book, Start With No. Again, it's a bias because I'm involved in that. And I just read a book that I would recommend to everyone if you want one of the greatest true human adventures is The Story of the Endurance. This is Ernest Shackleton, the voyage in 1915 to cross the South Pole, which went disastrously wrong. Shackleton would be a great example of, he is a great example of a fixer. If you want to talk about what the human spirit can endure, and you want an amazing story, whether you like, it's not fiction, endurance.
I have not heard that book, but I am going to add that to my list.
Yeah, I think it's not a current book. There's a lot of books that were written. I think it was Alfred Langley. He wrote the book in 1957, and you can read it. You can listen to it on Audible. But if you want to talk about a gripping story of the human spirit triumphing when everything goes wrong, you're at the bottom of the world, and how they survived for 17 months. It's an incredible story, and it's true. And recently, they just discovered the Endurance. I don't know, it was a couple miles down under South Pole ice.
That's crazy. I've heard that story. But I'm going to read that book. All right, I'm getting distracted. I'm breaking one of my rules. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self just starting out, what would it be?
Join a mastermind group sooner. Mastermind groups are accountability groups. They're kindred spirits. Like in business, I'm in one with fellow business owners, and it acts like a board of directors, and we meet every week. But earlier in my career, I would have tried to seek out or form my own mastermind group. I've been in one. It's a blessing. I've been in one for 20, 25 years, but I wish I could have done it the first year I had a company.
I love it. Last one. So how can our listeners find you? And then more importantly, how can they add value to your mission?
Oh, thank you, Joshua. I can be reached at interimexecs.com. And if you want to give us a hand, go take the FABS Leadership Assessment, because it's not only going to, I hope, help, if you get a good result, but it's an act of generosity for us because it's going to help validate and refine everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's the least I can do. Robert, you are a purposeful, accountable leader. It's kind of a term that I always like to throw out a pal. Thank you for everything that you're doing. This has been a great podcast episode.
Well, thank you, Joshua. God bless you, man.
All right, team, it's time for our after action review. What are the top 3 takeaways you should have from Robert? The first one that I wrote down, and I think this is always going to be a theme with each one of my podcast episodes, is find a mentor. but he broke it in two different ways that I really liked it is go find a mentor early on and be selective with the mentors that you find. And I talked about when you're finding a mentor or you're finding a coach, someone that is helping guide you on the journey, look at where they are in life because you will rise to that level. So when you're looking for a mentor, make sure they align with who you are and it's someone you could see yourself growing into and that you respect. And then another thing with a mentor that he talked about there at the very end, and it kind of connects that, is joining a mastermind. So I'm part of a mastermind. I meet every Sunday at 8 o'clock with a select group of active duty military officers, and we set achievable, realistic, time-based goals for the next week that are all centered around our yearly goals. And then what we set is our big 10-year goals. You have to surround yourself with people that are going to force you to rise, or you're just going to stagnate. The second key takeaway that I got is you cannot be all things to all people. And that's so true. As a leader, and I talked about this in this episode, you're going to have people that love you. You're going to have people right, wrong, and different feel neutral towards you. And then you're going to have people, no matter what you do, they will never like you. But that is part of being a leader. And you have to understand that is whatever organization you go into, you can't appease everyone. You were put into that position for a reason, and that is to make tough decisions based on what is best for the organization, not individuals and not yourself. The final key takeaway is language creates reality. And I loved it when Robert was talking about his spark. What prompted him to go and write all these different books that he's had? Part of it was being mentors, but the other key thing was he saw the power of what a book can do, of how it can impact so many lives. And I talked about this before, is that our language shapes what we believe, right? Our beliefs, our principles, our core values, who we are, how we interact with the world, and how other people see us. But those beliefs shape our actions, what we do, our deeds in life. And then eventually those compound onto our legacy of who we will be remembered as. And I love how Robert captured that in writing books. And that's one of his passions is, and we were talking after the podcast of how he could just continue to write books, but he finds it very challenging to potentially run a podcast for long term. And I to see that as an opposite. I find it daunting to write a book, but I love talking about leadership and I love having leaders on with different perspectives. So to sum them up real quick, find a mentor, find them early. You cannot be all things to all people, and language creates reality. Do me a favor, guys. If you like what you've heard so far, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you rate this podcast. Make sure you share it. Go to McMillionLeadershipCoaching.com. Find one of my blogs. Give me some focused criticism. Let me know how I can get better. Reach out to me on social media. Let me know how I can get better. Remember, I'm your host, Josh McMillion, saying every day is a gift. Don't waste yours. I'll see you next time.